In the creative fields, giving and receiving feedback can be quite the challenge.
You are so dumb. You are really dumb. For real.
No one really likes to hear what they did wrong or how they could be better, and it can also be awkward trying to communicate that with other people when you're trying to see improvement and get people across that finish line. You know that they're capable of it,
Not quite my tempo.
but sometimes they're not quite living up to those expectations. So how to balance all that is quite the hurdle and quite the headache sometimes, because you never want to stifle someone's creativity, but at the same time, you want to see things get better and be improved. So I'd like to share a couple of my thoughts on the subject. I am by no means perfect at this. I mess up all the time, but I have gotten okay at figuring out the right way to deliver feedback and criticism, as well as receive it. I think I'll start with giving feedback because that's the easiest thing to do. We all have opinions. If we see something, we watch something, we immediately have a gut reaction.
We are not saying the same thing!
An instinct that says, that's good, or that's bad, or I like this, or I don't like that. Almost like when you take a bite of food, you can tell immediately whether you like it or not, what that taste is. And I think the same is true of art. When you're consuming content, you have a visceral reaction that you can't always control. Sometimes it is pure hatred. You just hate what you're looking at. It's boring, it's awful, and you just got to get it out. Some of you have left me those kinds of comments in the past.
You are one pathetic loser.
Where I say something that you just disagree with, and you gotta let me know in the comments, and I love to read it. When you're giving that kind of feedback, drawing that line between criticism and encouragement is really important.
You suck, you jackass.
Criticism is often destructive, and so we have the terminology constructive criticism as a way to kind of hedge that or safeguard it. But I like to frame feedback in a way of encouragement. I think that avoids the problem altogether. So we don't even delve into the realm of criticism of this was bad, or you should have done this, or oh, why'd you do that? That doesn't make any sense. All that negative stuff. Even if you're trying to be constructive with your criticism, it can still edge into that territory that's not all that productive and can actually defeat the person on the other side receiving it. You can be too critical to the point where it stifles the other person and they don't want to try harder. They don't want to do more.
I'm upset!
There are other times where that negative feedback can be a reinforcing factor, and I probably have that tendency. In the past, I can think of moments where I've heard something overly negative and it's made me want to prove them wrong and kind of try really, really hard to do my best the next time. But I find that that's not all that common. A lot of people, when they receive criticism of that kind of shrink and internalize it and give up, and they don't try again. So instead, I would try and aim for encouragement. How can you provide your feedback in such a way that it encourages the person to do better next time? And often that is met with the idea of appreciating their effort. Most people, when they think of the value of a thing, equate it to the effort that was put into it. So if someone tried really, really hard, they're thinking that this is worth a lot. Not financially, but just the value of it is a lot. I think of my kids when they draw something and they try really hard to stay in the lines, or they put a lot of effort into an art piece. If they show that to me and I immediately start criticizing it and saying how bad it is or what they could have done better, that's gonna defeat them. They're not gonna wanna show me their work the next time. Instead, what I do is I say, that's great, excellent job, you're so talented, that's amazing. And giving them that positive encouragement fuels them to do more. And the thing about working or drawing or filming or editing or anything creative is that the more you do it, you tend to kind of get better at it, especially if you're having that positive reinforcement. Now you might say that that's great for kids, but adults need to be treated differently. And I don't think that's true. I think adults are kind of big kids and kids are kind of just little adults. They just don't know enough yet. Yeah, my tone might be different, and of course I'm not gonna baby the adults around me, but there is a level of encouragement that I think needs to be applied to any type of feedback. And then within that, you can provide some suggestions for what they could try next time to improve it. Say, that's great, I love it. Oh, you tried really hard on that, that's so amazing. I'd love to see, and then fill in the blank with whatever the encouragement feedback might be. This works great if you're a client on any kind of creative project, or you're just working with friends or family or whoever it might be. Now, on the flip side of that, when you receive feedback, when you're taking criticism, most people aren't going to be quite that positive or all that encouraging. And the thing I always have to tell myself first and foremost is don't take it personally. They're just having a gut reaction. It's their instinct. They might just be spewing out their thoughts and feelings. And a lot of people aren't very good at refining those thoughts into something that is encouraging and positive. Usually it's kind of negative, and that's okay. It's human nature. We tend to overemphasize the negative aspects of our lives and play down the good parts, unfortunately, for whatever reason. But when you're receiving that type of feedback, I always like to try and read between the lines, because often what people say is not always what they mean. The words that they use and the way that it's said might not be conveying the message that they think it is, and you might be reading something totally different than their intent. So anytime I get feedback, I really like to look at it, review it a few times, even come back to it later, let it digest, let it settle. Let me read between the lines a little bit and figure out, okay, which part of this don't they like? Is it that they don't like the music, or is it that the music is just too loud and obnoxious? Those are two different things. That's just one example, but it runs the entire spectrum. There's always what's said and then what's meant, and they're not always the same thing. And then the second thing I like to remind myself is not everyone is gonna like everything you do. There are things that I like, foods that I like that other people don't like. There's art and movies that I enjoy that other people don't enjoy. There is no one size fits all piece of art or creative work. There are gonna be people who it resonates with, and there's gonna be people it doesn't. Then they just don't like it, and that's okay. For me, I look at it from my own perspective. Do I like it? Do I think it's good? Anytime I'm trying to hit someone else's definition of what they think is good, it's usually where we're not aligned. However, when I'm trying my hardest to make my best effort, that's usually when I'm the most proud and I'm the most fulfilled. So I do tend to separate the client work from the personal work. And on the personal side, you just got to find things that you enjoy doing, and it doesn't really matter what other people think. And then on the client side, you don't tie yourself personally to that work. You're serving their needs and what they want, their vision. You're fulfilling that. And it has no representation on you and what you want to do. I think that helps soften some of those battles and arguments that come up and just leads to general productivity overall. This is really tricky, especially if it is something that you've put a lot of time and effort and energy into. And for someone to come along and say that they don't like it kind of hurts, it kind of stings, because you've spent so much time on it.
Boo this man!
But that's the thing. Effort doesn't always mean that it's good. There are things you could spend a lot of time doing and they still might not be a good end result. Objectively, they might just be kind of bad. But it's doing that work and going through that process that allows you to refine your own skills, your own preferences, and your own style. To go back to the food analogy, there are things that you eat and they just taste good, and there's things that you eat and they taste bad. But there's also what people refer to as a refined palate.
That's a 10.
The more you eat certain things or you drink certain things, you can kind of acquire a new sense, a heightened sense of taste, and really understanding what is it about it that tastes good. And maybe there's things that in the past you thought were gross, and then over time you realize, oh no, I actually do like this. I can appreciate. You can see the nuance in between those flavors, and you can pull out what actually makes it good and why it's good. That feedback loop is really, really valuable in creating content, because it just means you get better. The more feedback you get, the more encouragement you get, the more feedback you're giving, the more encouragement you're giving. It's all one massive loop that just fulfills itself, getting better and better over time. So I would say when you're working with other people, try and be as encouraging, as positive as possible. Don't look at them like they're children, but keep that in mind. The things you would never say to a kid of, that sucks, that's terrible, that's trash. Treat adults with the same level of decency. And then when you're receiving criticism, try and frame it in a way that's encouraging to yourself, as well as understanding, okay, they probably didn't mean to be that negative or that critical. I'm just kind of interpreting it that way. That's how it's making me feel, but it's not necessarily their intent. And then try and decipher the actual message in between the harsh negative words. It's one of the great things about YouTube and this type of content creation is that I can get feedback from those comments. So please let me know your thoughts. I love those gut reactions when people hate something and they leave a note, and then when people love something and they leave a note. I think both are equally valuable, and it's my job on how I process that, how I receive it, as well as you on the next video or thing you might see and come across, as well as how would you want to receive feedback if it was given to you. Let me know your thoughts. I'd love to hear them.